Hello, this is Brenda Alcorn at the Colorado Basin River Forecast Center. And this is the Utah Water Supply Briefing for February 7th. As a reminder, this webinar, it's being recorded, and the recording and slides will be available on our webpage this afternoon. And during the webinar, if you have any questions, we do have someone monitoring the question box, so you can either type a question in or raise your hand, and we will either answer those during or possibly if it's something for everyone at the end of the webinar, we'll go through those. Okay, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So in today's briefing, we're going to review precipitation that's occurred so far this water year, and especially over the last month, the current snowpack, fall soil moisture, the February 1st water supply forecasts, the typical February forecast error. And then we'll talk about upcoming weather and give you time to ask questions and show you the contacts within our office if you have any follow-up afterwards. And then at the end, gonna do a brief web page demo, go over some of the new things on our web page this year. So to start out, just looking at the water year precipitation so far. So in the graphic on the far left, that's the monthly precipitation. You can see along the x-axis each of the major river basins in Utah listed. And on the y-axis is the percent of average. And each of the bars then is a different month. And so you can see the brighter blue, the last bar in each of those groupings is for January. And as you're all probably well aware, January was a much above average precipitation month across the entire state. And so you can see, especially as we move south, it was even wetter. So up in the northern, the Bear and the Weber didn't, they were probably over 150%. But then as you keep moving, down to the Virgin River Basin, we were almost 300% of average for the month. And you can see we've been above average since November, December, and January, and all of the basins have been above average. And so when you look at the water year precipitation, which is October 1st through the end of January, that's that middle graphic. You can see all basins are above to much above average precipitation to this point. And you can see the actual numbers in the table on the right. So again, the Bear's not quite as wet, but still doing well at 125% of normal for the water year. And I'm not going to list, you can read them yourselves, but then we move down to the south, we've got the Virgin at 167% of average so far this year. And then looking at this on a map, on the far left, that's the January monthly precipitation. And you can see those purple areas are 200 to 300% of average. And so I just highlighted, and again, you see a lot of purple and deep blue across the state. And I've highlighted a few areas that aren't bad, they're just not quite as good as the rest of the basin. So first, up in the far northeast portion of the Bear River Basin, it's that lighter blue, only 110 to 130% of average for the month. And then kind of in the headwater areas of the Weber, the Bear, the Provo, there's an area that's not quite as deep blue there. Again, more in the 130 to 150% of average in that area. And when you look in the map in the middle, and that's our water year precipitation, again, those areas kind of do show up as being not quite as wet as the rest of the state. And I just wanted to make the point too that most of the precipitation during January occurred during pretty much the first half of the month. And so that's that smaller map on the right. And you can see there we had for a while there some even higher amounts, deeper purples, which are indicative of greater than 300% of average. And then as we kind of, it didn't completely dry out, but wasn't quite as wet during the second half of the month. And so that's where we ended up with that map on the left. Okay, the current snowpack, and this is as of yesterday, February 6th. On the far left, this is a map from the NRCS, and this is their snow water equivalent maximum rank as of February 5th, actually, for this map. And if there's a 1 by the dot, that means it's the highest snow water equivalent for that day at that SNOTEL site. But what I wanted to show, and I've highlighted, across the Wasatch Front and down into central Utah a bit, basically sitting, you see a lot that are second highest, third highest in that area. So that's the area that's really kind of been hit the hardest, getting the best amount of the snow right now. And you move down to the south where we have been very wet down in the Virgin River Basin. And down there, we're looking at SNOTEL snow water equivalents in the top 5 of their record. In the map in the middle, this is showing the CBRFC model snow water equivalent as a percent of median, and this is of February 6th. The shading is the model snow. The squares, the colored squares, are the SNOTEL observed percent median SWE. And you can see the colors match up pretty well, but really what you're seeing, again, very high amounts. We're looking at 150 to 200% of median with some even higher amounts, some of the purple shading areas in some areas, especially down south and on the eastern end of the Uintas. So conditions right now looking very good. Again, if you look at the model snow by forecast group in the Bear, it's not as wet as everywhere else, but it's still almost 150% of median at this time. We've got the Weber 165, Six Creeks almost 170, and so on. The Virgin, again, sitting at 245% of median snow right now. Just touched briefly on the model soil moisture conditions. Again, we show the fall soil moisture. And so on the left is the soil moisture from the fall of 2021. So last year's start point. This year's start point is on the right from the fall, early November of 2022. And what you see is, unfortunately, we are starting with a little bit drier soil conditions this year than we were last year. And this makes a difference because even though the timing and magnitude of spring runoff is ultimately a result of the snow water equivalent conditions and spring weather, but it also is affected by these antecedent soil moisture conditions. Okay, so we're gonna, those are the conditions we're looking at as we were making our forecast at the beginning of February. And so we'll just jump right into the current water supply forecasts. So this map is showing it's showing the February 1 forecast as a percent of average of the April through July volume. So what you can see again, of course, because we have much above average snowpack, we've been wet. These forecasts are all in the above average, if not much above average range. So what's listed in this table is the median forecast for each of the forecast groups there. And again, you see in the north, the Bear and the Weber not quite as wet. We're forecasting on a medium forecast there of 120% of average. And then as you move south, it gets a little wetter, looking at 150% of average in most of the basins. The Duchesne also is not quite as wet, 115% of average there. So we'll just kind of go through each of the forecast groups and we'll take a closer look. So in the Bear River Basin, the current forecast range from 104% to 136% of average. The January median of all these forecast points was 110%. The February is 120%. So we have seen some improvement in these forecasts since last month. You can see again that northeastern part of the Bear River Basin not doing quite as well. Forecasts are a little lower there in terms of the percent of average. And then also in the headwaters of the Bear, on the Bear, Utah, Wyoming state line, kind of on the towards the bottom of the map here, you can see also not quite as well, where it's wetter down in the Little Bear and Blacksmith Fork. And we can see that a little more here. I zoomed in on the model snow percent median in this map here. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So I have a couple of our ESP evolution plots shown here in the Bear. On the top is the Smiths Fork near the border. And that's that northeast portion of the basin. And you can see here there was no change between the January 1st and the February 1st forecast in terms of that 50% exceedance forecast. And the current forecast is for 94,000 acre feet, which is 107% of average. And just a reminder of what all is being shown on this plot. In the blue shading background, that is the raw model guidance, and the bottom is a 90% exceedance. The top is the 10% exceedance, and the blue line through the middle is the 50% exceedance. The pink vertical lines are the official forecasts. The dot in the middle is a 50% exceedance, and then there's a 90, 70, 30, 10% exceedance. And what those mean, the 10% exceedance forecast here is for 122,000 acre feet. It means there's a 10% chance of exceeding that value. And in the 90% exceedance is for 70,000 acre feet. There's a 90% chance of exceeding that much with a 10% chance of not getting to 70,000 acre feet. And the official 50% exceedance forecast really means that there's a 50% chance it will be above that value and a 50% chance of being below that value. So overall, there's a 20% chance that our observed runoff is going to fall outside the range of this forecast. And so early in the season, there's a large amount of uncertainty and spread in the forecast, but you will see, and you can see here where the January spread is wider than February, and we'll see that kind of continue to shrink as the season goes along. So we talked about at the top, that's the Smiths Fork. The graphic on the bottom is for the Little Bear. And you can see there was an increase. On January 1st, we were forecasting 47,000 acre feet, which was 120% of average. And the February 1st forecast is 53,000 acre feet, which is 136% of average. And looking at the map of the snow, again, you can see BOR is that Smiths Fork near border point. Snow conditions not quite as good up there as they are down in the lower left of the map where PRZ is circled. That's the Little Bear at Paradise. You can see the snow. We have that darker colored snow, which is 150 to 200% of median there. And so you can see where those differences across the basin are. Okay, moving on to the Weber River Basin. So the January 1st median forecast was 130%, and in February it's 120%. With our forecast range right now, it's 112 to 152% of normal. And so what you can see is, again, if we look at the kind of in the southeastern portion of the basin, the headwaters of the Weber, these forecasts actually came down just a little. And this is that area that didn't have quite as much precipitation as the rest of the basin. And then we did see some increases in forecasts in some of these points that are a little bit lower elevation and to the west. So East Canyon, South Fork of the Ogden, Pine View Reservoir, those forecasts did increase a bit. So taking another look, diving a little deeper into the snow in this basin. So in the upper left, this is kind of a newer graphic. This is our CBRFC model group snow water equivalent plot for the Weber River Basin. This is similar to the SNOTEL group plots that we have on our webpage that you may be familiar with, but this is working with just our model snow. And so similar to the SNOTEL group plot, it just averages all of the areas within the basin. And we're just using these, what we call our significant areas. So if you look at that map, anything that's colored that's in the Weber River Basin is part of that group plot. There's no weighting of the areas. And right now, this is not available for you to look at on our webpage. This is a little experimental that we're looking at this year. And so what you see is 2023 is that black line, and we're currently 163% of median, which is the blue line. Last year, 2022, is the green line. And the other thing to note on this is we're really quite a bit above the average seasonal peak for snow water equivalent in the Weber River Basin right now. So again, things are looking really good. Over on the right, I have a couple model segment snow plots, and these are showing the percent daily median. And so these are showing the individual elevation zones for a specific forecast point. And so it only shows the local segment area. So if it's not a headwater in our model, it's not showing you, including all the snow that's actually above it, just in its local area. And these are available on the web. So on this plot, along the x-axis, we have time. As you can see, this is starting the end of November and goes to the current time. And on the y-axis, we have the snow water equivalent percent daily median. And so on the top one, we're looking at the Weber near Oakley. And you can see the darker black line across the plot is just indicating where the 160% of median line is. At Oakley, the upper zone we've defined as 10,000 to 11,000 feet. That spans that area. And then we have a middle zone that spans from 8,500 to 10,000 feet. So that's plotted in the red with that upper zone in blue. And you can see that, from the beginning of January to now, it is somewhat similar, but we did have a pretty good bump during the middle of the month before things kind of settled back down as we dried out. The other gray lines are individual SNOTEL sites and where they stand as a percent median and some of their elevations. So the darkest one is Trial Lake. It's at almost 10,000 feet. We've got Hayden Fork at 9,200 feet, and then Smith and Morehouse at 7,600 feet. And so you can see again, the model snow does track pretty well with the percent of median on those SNOTEL sites as well. And just a reminder, the snow in our model is built on the basically on the snow-tail precipitation, and it builds and melts its own snowpack. So we're not using the snow-tail, snow water equivalent directly, but we definitely like to look at it as a reality check for our model. On the bottom, showing East Canyon Reservoir. So this one, again, where the Weber near Oakley is a headwater, the East Canyon Reservoir is not. There are some segments above it. So this is just showing you the snow in the area below the point above it and this East Canyon Reservoir. So this is a little bit lower elevation than Weber near Oakley. We see the upper area here is defined as 7,000 to 9,000 feet, and the lower area is 5,700 to 7,000 feet. And so you can see this upper area here, that horizontal line is 180% of median. So a little better conditions there, like I said, between the lower elevation and being to the west. And again, a couple of snow tails also being plotted. Thames Canyon and Parley Summit are those two on that. Okay, we've got 6 creeks. Again, this is an area that's been doing really, really well right here along the Wasatch Front. In January, the median forecast was 135%. In February, it's up to 155%. The forecasts are currently ranging from 123% of average at City Creek up to almost 200% at Lambs Creek. We've got the Cottonwoods, 135 at Little Cottonwood and 144% of average at Big Cottonwood. So again, conditions looking really good here right now. Down to the Utah Lake Basin, Provo River area. Again, you see the headwaters of the Provo woodland. That kind of backs up to the same headwaters as Bear Lake and the Weber River Basin. Again, conditions a little lower there than in the rest of the basin, with forecasts at about 127% of average at the Provo woodland. And then as we move downstream, Deer Creek's up at 144% of average. Moving south, we've got Spanish Fork at 143% of average. So again, the median forecast in the basin did increase a bit. January was at 135%, and February 1st, 145% normal. So again, really good conditions at this point. Moving over to the Duchesne, again, not quite as good here, and you could should have pointed this out maybe on the water year precipitation map, but definitely not quite as wet as the rest of Utah has been through the water year to date, but it did see a little bit of an increase. The January 1 median forecast was 110%, and on February 1 up to 115%. So again, the wettest part is probably towards the Price River Basin. We see over on the west, Current Creek at 158% of average. We've got Schofield at 177% of average right now for that forecast. Whereas coming off the south slope of the Uintas, we're looking in general at 110 to 125% of average for those areas. Moving further south to the Sevier and Virgin River Basins. In the Sevier River Basin, and again, so this area was very wet again, if you remember, over 200% of average precipitation for the month. So the Sevier River Basin, the median forecast has increased from 110% in January to 150% as of February 1st. And the Virgin River Basin was near normal on January 1, and now we're looking at 145% of normal, with the Virgin at 138% of average. So how well do we usually verify these February 1st forecasts? There's still quite a bit of error in these. And so what you can see, picked out a few points in the table over there on the right. We tend to do better at higher elevation basins. So like Big Cottonwood Creek, the error right now is about 18%, and you see Provo Woodland, Bear at the state line, all those, Weber, Oakley, all those around, hovering around 20%. But then as we move to maybe some lower elevations or places where there are diversions we don't have data for, places that can be affected by rain during the runoff, then we Okay, so moving on to what we've seen so far this month, weather-wise. So month-to-date precipitation, not looking great, but it's very early in the month, of course. So you see on this map, as of February 6th, it's a lot of pink, which means basically less than 30% of average for the month to date. And you can see the smaller maps across the top there are the daily precipitation, and basically not a lot of color until yesterday. So it's been dry. And so, yeah, it's been mostly dry, less active during early February. And in fact, this kind of drier period has, started towards the end of January. As I mentioned, that second half of January wasn't completely dry, but definitely not as wet. And so how has this dry start to February affected the snow water equivalent percentages? So this is what's in the table. So the first number is what the percent median snow water equivalent was as of February 1st. And then the second column is as of February 6th. And then there's a change column. So in the Bear, we've that percent median, this isn't absolute snow water equivalent, this is just the percent of median. It's gone down 8%. The Weber's gone down 5%. So basically what we're seeing is decreases in the 5 to 10% range, except for in the Virgin, where we have come down almost 20% there since the beginning of the month, just due to lack of precipitation. So what can we expect in the next little while weather-wise? This is the 7-day precipitation forecast from the Weather Prediction Center. So there's going to be a glancing trough that will bring some precipitation to northern Utah tomorrow. But right now, the amounts, the highest QPF quantitative precipitation forecast is less than 1/4 of an inch. So there will be a ridge of high pressure that will build in briefly over the weekend, towards the weekend. So we should see some basically dry weather and warming temperatures through Saturday. And then on Sunday, there is a trough of low pressure that's forming and is right now forecast to move, kind of dig down into Arizona. And so what that means for Utah right now is we will have below average temperatures, but not looking like we're going to see a lot of precipitation here out of that. But we will be cold. So, and this is another way of looking at this next kind of 7 to 10 days. This is the 500 millibar geopotential height anomalies. So where you see the blue, that's kind of a below normal, like lower heights, and then the pinker that's off the coast is higher. And so we see an Eastern Pacific ridge forming on average for this period, and troughing over the Intermountain West here. So this does favor below normal temperatures for our area, with some chances of precipitation. But again, it looks like Utah is not going to get a lot during this period in terms of precipitation. But the good news is that we will remain cold and not have a big ridge over the top of us for a long period of time in this next week or so. Then looking a little further out, this is the 8 to 14 day outlook. And this would cover the February 14th to 20th period. And so there are slightly elevated odds of above average precipitation for Utah. That's what you see in the map on the left. And on the map on the right, again, those increased chances of below normal temperatures. So in summary, it is still early in the snow accumulation water supply forecasting season. So we generally across Utah, or at least the north, will accumulate snow through at least March on average. Water year precipitation is much above average across Utah. The current snowpack is much above average across the state. In snow, the model snow water equivalent values in almost all the across all of Utah are above the average seasonal peak at this time. Water supply forecasts are much above average across Utah. And while the weather has been drier than it was the first part of January, the last 2.5 weeks, there are indications of a return to a more active pattern, but it's right now definitely not looking as wet as it was in January. So this is just our future webinar schedule. So this was the February webinar. So on March right now, we are scheduled to do this webinar again on Tuesday, March 7th. We also have a Colorado River Basin focused webinar that on the same days as this one, and it happens earlier at 10 a.m. Well, this one's at 11:30. Next month, we will be issuing our first peak flow forecasts of the year. And we will be giving a webinar on Monday, March 20th about those. And since you're all on this, I assume you know how to register for any future webinars you're interested in. So here's a list of contacts for the Colorado Basin River Forecast Center. In terms of Utah, Patrick Kormos is our main forecaster for the Great Basin and the Sevier River Basin. We've got Trevor Grout covering the Virgin River Basin, and I forecast for the Duchesne River Basin in Utah. So at this time, I'll pause and see if there were any questions.
Hey, Brenda, I'm not seeing any questions yet.
Okay, great. Well, if there are no questions, this is the end of that portion of the webinar. So thank you for joining us for this. Now, the second part of this, I'm going to do a brief overview of our webpage, kind of a little demo just to especially highlight some of the newer things that we have added. And we may have moved some things around as well. So, so if you'd like to stick around for that, that's what we will do. Otherwise, thank you again for joining. Okay, so try not to spend too much time on this, and again, I will kind of just hit some highlights. But if you ever have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us, and we will help you. So this is our entry page, basically our homepage. And what you see on this map is each one of these dots represents a place that we create a forecast for. These are not water supply forecasts. These are our daily 10-day forecasts. So first on this map, I just want to show, this is a little bit new this year. If you hover over this, there are different map layers that you can put on and backgrounds. And so one thing that can be useful is this forecast group layer. And I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a bit. to some places in Utah here. This is northern Utah. And so this background then is what we call a forecast group. So where I'm kind of circling right now, that would be the Weber River Basin. And then to the north of that, that's the Bear River Basin. To the south, you see the Provo River Basin. And then just to the east, or sorry, to the west, this would be Six Creeks area. If you want even more detail, you can put on the basin background, and then that shows you the delineation for each what we call segment in our model. So if we zoom in here a little more, so this delineation, this is the Weber at Oakley. And then you can see the next downstream point. This is Rockport Reservoir. And so this is a headwater, and that water moves down into Rockport, and it has a local area. So, and you notice too, as I zoom in, you start seeing some IDs come up against the dots. If you hover, you will actually get the name if you haven't memorized all of our little IDs. Okay, so just going to, when you select one of these, you'll get our 10-day stream flow forecast. First, it'll be a pop-up, and then if you click on that pop-up, it will open in a separate page. So again, this is for the Weber near Oakley. A couple of things. So you could see we're forecasting 5.1 feet and then down, or 5.11 and then down to 5.1. It makes it look a little funny because it's linear stage. You can swap that to linear flow here on the on-off. And so that gives you a little bit smoother line. And so what you see here is there is no observed data being plotted, just the simulated. That's our model simulation. This gauge we have set bad because during the winter it bounces around a bit as it has gets affected by ice. And so that will not be plotted here. And then you see the forecast portion in green. So I'm going to swap back to something that actually has some data. So if we go, this is Big Cottonwood, kind of at 300 West. This is a little further downstream. And so what you see here in our forecast is that we are showing, you see a little bit of fluctuation, kind of possibly some daily snow melt from some lower elevation snow occurring over the next week. So, and you see that observed data in the blue. Okay, going back to Oakley, just to show some other things you can put on the plot. You can say, I want to see what the flood stage is. And you do that on the scale too, and you can see how closely the forecast or observed are to any critical levels in this basin. So you can also put on, if you're used to our old hydrographs, had this historical exceedance from the USGS in the background. Oh, I need to take off. Sorry. There we go. So you can put those back on in the show hide area. And then go back to the main page. So I'll just mention, so we have, you can see here moving down on the right side of this, there are, you can get to, you can plot the snow either by just opening this up and showing, if you just do this, you'll see the NRCS SNOTEL sites, and I can hide all the others, or I can have them on together. But most of these tabs you can also get to from the top menu, pull down. And if you do this, if you use it from here, you lose your zoom, it'll reset it, but it will show only that type. You won't have to turn anything on and off. So 2 ways to get to these data types on this front map. So the one thing that I do want to highlight on this though, in terms of overlays, and you can see it here, the forecast precipitation. So if you see interactive map, that means it's going to show up on this front map. And so it'll give you that background of the current forecast precipitation. It defaults to the full 7-day forecast. Again, this isn't not a lot of precipitation being forecast in the area, but for this, you can change the transparency on that. And another thing is you can see the change in the forecast. And of course, it's just a change because we only have 6 days that we had yesterday and today. And this will show you, again, it's not very exciting because we don't have a lot, but really little change. We're anywhere from 0 to 0.1 or minus 0.1 to 0.1 plus 0.1 change in that 6-day total between the 2 days. Okay, another same thing, you know, we have the daily precipitation you can see here. And so you can either have it on this front page map where you can zoom in as you like, you can put any kind of different background on it, or from the top menu, if you go to static maps, you're going to see, like, show you the whole month. So if we went back to January, it would have every day for January, and you can see we also have some of the other historical. And so that's similar. If you were to look at forecast precipitation, you could also see kind of this history of those maps. Okay, back to the overlays. So the monthly precipitation. So this shows right now, this is on the water year, and this is showing all areas. I can select the maps we generally show. We show significant areas. This is where most of our April through July runoff is going to come from, are these areas that are highlighted here. And so you have that option. If I go to the monthly precipitation static maps, this is where you can zoom into the state of Utah. And again, you can show all or significant. You click on one of these maps, you'll get a bigger version of it. Okay, another thing I wanted to highlight, under the water supply menu, so again, you can see the soil moisture on that front map, or you can come to the static map. And what a new thing now is not only seeing the fall of every year, but I can see the difference between them. And so this is the difference between fall of 2021 and 2022. And you can see in Utah, we see some oranges, and that means slightly drier soils at the beginning of this year versus last year. And then the water supply tab, there's so much under here. So if you haven't explored this, you can. I think you're all probably familiar with the forecast map. Here, this shows the first of month forecasts as a % of average. And again, if you click on these, you can get to the evolution plots that we put in the webinar. So these are the first of month. You can also just see our latest model guidance. And since we haven't had a lot of time, the colors aren't very different, but if we've been in an extended dry or wet period, you can kind of see that those colors would change. So again, if we were to select point here, this is the evolution plot. There are a lot of plot options here. This is currently using no precipitation forecast. That means we're just going straight to climatology, but you can, and that's generally what we've been showing in the webinars. But you can turn on a 7-day precipitation forecast. And what you see here is, of course, where the model guidance is decreasing because we have a dry forecast. From here, you can also change this. I like to turn off the max min if we're not near them so that the expands my viewing area here. You can look at these in terms of the actual probability traces. And so what each of these lines, so this is the maximum trace that ESP up here at the top, and the minimum, and then also all those levels that we do forecast, the 90%, 70, 50, 30, 10% exceedance. So you can see how each of those has been changing through the season. Also under here, under data, you can see historical volumes, just a listing of April through July volumes for the period of record for the site. This will get you to some verification graphics for the site. And here you can get to snow for that segment. So this is for the upper and lower, and it'll tell you the elevation bands. It'll say here's some snow tell that's kind of in the area. And you can play with this plot a bit. Okay, back to the water supply tab. We do put out a forecast discussion twice a month beginning January 1st. And so this gets you to the latest one we put out on February 1st. And then there's also, you can see under the discussion archive, you can get to previous discussions that we've done. Documentation is a very important tab here. You can get a lot of information on what exactly our water supply forecasts are and how they are created. Exploring this tab, this page, I highly recommend. A couple things, so you can get to the soil moisture here as well, and this will give you some explanation of what our model soil moisture is, as well as getting to those maps. This will give you, so again, water supply forecasts are unregulated. It's meaning any diversions or reservoirs that we have data for, we're pretending like those don't exist in those. And so this will give you a list of those adjustments that are being accounted for in each forecast point. So if you wanted to look at that. And then there's our river basin stick diagrams that kind of give you an overview of how our model is set up. And so if you were to come here and we can look at the Weaver River Basin, it kind of shows you, we were at Oakley, we've got a diversion coming out, we've got some additional unmeasured water that's being lost downstream of that segment before we get to Rockport. So one nice thing about these have been updated, and now if you hover, you can actually get the name. Again, if you don't have our IDs memorized, you can get the name. If you click on this, it will take you to that 10-day hydrograph. So those are some improvements we've made to that. In terms of our webinar slides and recordings, those can be found under About, Papers and Presentations, and then we divide them up basically by year. And so if you come here, you can see here's from January, you can get to those, and we will have the February slides up later this afternoon. And then under climate forecasts, we do link to the CPC, Climate Prediction Center, and the the maps and forecasts that they create. So that's an easy place for you to get to those if you're interested. So that was just a really quick overview. If you're interested, I encourage you to explore, and if you have questions, please contact us. So with that, I think I will wrap it up. If there are any last questions, now's your chance. Otherwise, thank you for attending, and hopefully we will see you in March.